Have you ever had your own family hold a secret meeting just to erase everything you've built? I almost didn't open that email, but one line changed everything. Regarding the reassignment of executive authority from Madeline Carter. They were removing me from the company I rebuilt after my father's stroke because I was too emotional to lead. They used my therapy history to call me unstable. But what they didn't know was that my father left me a handwritten letter. If they try to take this from you, they are breaking my will, literally. In this video, I'll show you how I flipped the boardroom narrative with a 46-second audio clip with one clause buried in legal bylaws, and with a voice they didn't expect me to use my own, because silence may feel safe, but the truth, that's where your real power lives. If you've ever stayed quiet to keep the peace, this story's for you. Watch to the end, because what they tried to take, I took back clause by clause. Before we dive into the story, let me learn a bit about you. If you're a charming lady, please leave the number 1 in the comments. And if you're a dashing gentleman, leave the number 2. This way, I can send you a special greeting. Now let's start the story together. I almost didn't open the email. It was late, just past 10, and I had peppermint tea steeping on the counter while reruns of a baking competition hummed in the background. The subject line looked suspicious: Harold Carter estate update, re-Madeline Carter. I hovered over it for a full minute debating. Promo scam. But my name was there plain as day, and something in my gut told me to click. Inside, no flashy graphics. Just a plain message attached are the minutes from the estate subcommittee meeting held October 2nd regarding Carter Logistics Executive Review. No greeting, no context, just the words and a PDF with my father's name in the header and mine in the body, spelled correctly no less. I clicked the attachment. The first page looked like something I wasn't meant to see. Per the Family Advisory Review, we propose an internal shift in voting rights, citing Madeline Carter's emotional entanglement and diminished objectivity. I blinked, then reread the line and the next. Pending board approval, temporary reassignment of decision-making authority to Logan Carter will allow for smoother shareholder relations. They were removing me. They were removing me from the very company I helped rebuild after Dad's stroke. The logistics firm I bled weekends and holidays into. The name Carter was mine too, but apparently only conditionally. The peppermint tea had gone cold. I stood in the kitchen, too stunned to sit, too furious to think. I picked up my phone and called her. My mother answered on the third ring. "Maddie," she said, smooth as silk. "It's late. You sent me that email." A pause. "You received the minutes, I assume. I told Logan not to send it yet. You held a meeting. About me, without me." She sighed. "It wasn't about you, it was about stability." I laughed, a brittle sound that surprised even me. "By stability, you mean control. I mean consistency," she replied, tone clipped. "We'll discuss it properly when you're not so reactive." That word again. Reactive. It was always her shield against my clarity. I hung up before she could launch into another monologue dressed up as diplomacy. The air in the house felt wrong, heavy, like it had absorbed her voice and didn't know how to let it go. I paced back and forth through the hall, past the still-lined photos, past the dusty bookshelf no one touched anymore. I ended up in Dad's old study, a room we hadn't changed since the funeral. Stacks of binders lined the desk. His coffee mug, world's okayest golfer, still sat beneath the bookshelf light. I opened drawers methodically, not knowing what I was looking for until I found it. An envelope tucked beneath a folder labeled Executive Exceptions. Cream-colored, thick paper. In Dad's handwriting, for Madeline only. My throat tightened. I sat on the floor and opened it slowly, like whatever was inside might break. Inside was a single handwritten page, his familiar looping scrawl covering it top to bottom. It was dated July 14th, 2 months before he passed. Mads. If you're reading this, it means I'm gone and something's wrong. I always knew your mother would try to restructure. After I left, she doesn't trust many things. Not even you, though. She'll never say that out loud. There's a clause I insisted on keeping in the bylaws buried in the revisions from 2017. It protects your equity stake as long as you remain an active executive. They can't touch your shares without breaching the operating agreement, and my will. Logan won't understand. He always thought he was entitled to more than he earned. And your mother. She'll make it sound like strategy, but it's always been about control for her. If they try to take this from you, they are breaking my will, literally. Love, Dad. I let the paper fall into my lap. The room was quiet, but my mind wasn't. It buzzed with every dinner skipped for meetings, every birthday missed for deadlines, every time I chose the company over sleep, over relationships, over myself. They were rewriting the narrative, calling me unstable, emotional. But it wasn't emotion that had built Carter Logistics, it was grit. Mine. The only sound was the soft rustling of dried leaves brushing against the study window. Outside, autumn pressed in orange and copper shadows spilling across the porch like fading promises. I stared at that last line on the letter again. Breaking my will, literally. I folded the letter, slid it back into the envelope, and stood. My father had left me more than just instructions, he left me a warning, and I was finally ready to listen. I didn't bother with an umbrella. The rain matched my mood, cold, unwelcome, and persistent. It slicked the Cincinnati pavement as I crossed the street toward my father's old office, my boots splashing through shallow puddles like I didn't care what followed me in. The brass door handle was worn smooth by decades of use. I gripped it anyway like something familiar could still ground me. Inside, everything still smelled like him. Lemon polish, old leather, paper that had soaked in too many years of tension. For a moment, I just stood there, letting the damp air cling to my coat and the silence settle in. Samantha Wells was already waiting in the conference room. She stood when I entered not as a courtesy, but as someone who still respected the man this place once belonged to. "You okay?" She asked, her expression more intuitive than sympathetic. I shook my head. "Ask me again when I understand how my name ended up missing from my own company's meeting minutes." She gestured toward the seat across from her. "Let's dig in. I pulled Harold's final trust documents last night. There's more here than you were told, or maybe more than they wanted you to know." I sat peeling off my coat, still damp around the sleeves. "That tracks." She slid a folder across the table, thick-tabbed, marked in her organized handwriting. The original operating agreement and the addendum Harold signed in January. This is the one that ensures you maintain your 33% voting power unless the clause is challenged on the grounds of incapacitation. I paused. He did that after Logan's third strategic investment. Flopped, didn't he? She nodded slowly. Harold didn't say it outright, but he built these protections knowing Patricia and Logan might come after you if he wasn't here to stop them. I swallowed hard. Then why was I kept in the dark? I don't think you were meant to be. I think he passed too soon. The door creaked open just as I was about to ask another question. Mr. Alden shuffled in glasses fogging from the rain outside. He looked surprised to see me, but not apologetic. "Ms. Wells?" I brought the archival minutes from the strategic meeting, he said carefully, placing the folder down. His eyes flicked toward me. "Didn't realize you'd be here, Maddie." "Neither did the rest of my family," I said, voice flat. He gave a tight smile. "Right. Well, Patricia mentioned there'd be a follow-up vote, something about reviewing the bylaw clause related to executive mental fitness." Samantha stiffened beside me. "Wait, what I asked? Oh, I probably shouldn't say he backpedaled. I thought you were informed. Patricia was concerned, mentioned something about your therapy history. Just procedural, I think." I stood. My therapy. His discomfort deepened. She said it was to ensure the board was protected from any emotional liability. Emotional liability, I echoed. The words landed like stones. My hands curled at my sides. After Mr. Alden left, Samantha looked at me. "That's how they're planning to do it. If they prove you're emotionally compromised, they can motion to override the clause." I blinked once, twice. My throat felt like it had thickened with smoke. I told my mother about therapy in confidence. She said she was proud of me for seeking help. Samantha didn't say anything. It was Ethan who finally broke the silence. He had stayed quiet in the corner until now, giving me room to process. But his voice was steady when he finally spoke. She never meant it. She just collected it like a weapon. I let that sink in. And then I asked the question I hadn't dared voice yet. Is there any way to stop this? Samantha didn't hesitate. Yes, but it's time sensitive. You need to issue a counterstatement to the board and submit a legal hold on any vote to dissolve the clause. But we'll need something powerful, something recorded on the record. I nodded slowly. I'll do it. She hesitated. You sure it'll stir everything up? No more tiptoeing. I'm done tiptoeing. She opened her laptop and began drafting the motion. I glanced back down at the clause Harold's neat signature beneath the title, Irrevocable Protections, unless incapacitated. A clause written by a father who saw this coming before I ever did. They weren't just trying to push me out of the company. They were trying to erase the part of Harold that trusted me. That trusted only me. And if they were willing to twist my honesty into weakness, then I had no choice left but to fight them with the same truth they feared most. One conversation at a time. One clause at a time. One boardroom door at a time. I walked into the boardroom like a daughter. I left knowing I was just an obstacle. The glass doors closed behind me with a soft click, but the silence on the other side hit like a slammed vault. Patricia Mother technically sat at the head of the long mahogany table, her hands folded like she'd been waiting for a chess move she already planned 3 turns ahead. Logan leaned back in his chair, pretending he hadn't just flinched at my entrance. Brittany offered a brittle smile and lowered her eyes, smoothing out a wrinkle in her already perfect blouse. There were 2 other board members, quiet placeholders in suits, sitting stiff like they'd accidentally walked into a funeral. I thought you were taking some time off, Patricia said, her tone light, but her eyes narrowed. She brushed invisible lint from her sleeve. I didn't respond right away. I slid my folder onto the polished table and sat down across from her. The chair let out a tired creak beneath me fitting. Everything in this room looked expensive, curated, and deeply exhausted. I received the minutes I said, the ones from the meeting I wasn't invited to. Logan cleared his throat. It wasn't a formal board meeting, Maddie, just a strategic discussion. That involved voting on dissolving the clause that protects my shares, I asked. That kind of strategy. A flicker. Just a flicker in his jaw. He adjusted his cufflinks like he needed something to do with his hands. Patricia remained perfectly composed. We were considering all options. This company has always required steady leadership. After everything you've been through. She paused delicately. The implication hung between us like fog. I reached into my folder and unfolded a letter. The sound of paper against wood was louder than it should have been. I read it slowly, clearly, Harold Carter's handwriting echoing in my voice. As long as Madeline Carter remains an active executive, her shareholding is irrevocable under Clause 4C. If they try to take this from you, they are breaking my will, literally. Silence. The kind that checks its pulse. Logan scoffed. Dad didn't understand the pressure this company is under. The world's changed. And frankly, someone who's been in therapy for 2 years might not be the public face our investors want. I didn't flinch. I had prepared for this part. Dear friend, what would you do if you were in my shoes? I bet you can't guess what's coming next. But before we go any further, drop a 5 in the comments if you're still with me, because what happens next might just leave you speechless. Instead, I pulled out my phone and pressed play. My father's voice, grainy, warm, and unmistakably lucid, filled the room. If something happens to me, I want you to know I trust you, Maddie. You see the people? You know the numbers. Don't let them treat you like you're broken. You're the future of this company, not just its past. The silence that followed wasn't awkward. It was sharp. Even the 2 silent board members exchanged glances. Patricia's face didn't change, but her fingers, pale and manicured, gripped the armrest a little tighter. That was private, she said. A family moment. Exploiting grief doesn't make your position stronger. No, I replied calmly. but neither does manipulating the truth. Across the table, Brittany shifted in her chair. She reached for her water, but didn't drink. Her discomfort was a living thing. Samantha's voice came through the laptop speaker. This recording, along with Mr. Carter's written note, makes any attempt to revoke Clause 4C legally challengeable. I advise the board to reconsider the motion. One of the silent members cleared his throat. Perhaps we should revisit this after a more thorough legal review. Logan stood abruptly, the chair scraping loud across the floor. This is ridiculous. You all want to pretend that she's stable. She hasn't spoken to half of us in months. I've been busy keeping the company from hemorrhaging after your last failed expansion bid, I said, finally letting some heat into my voice. And I'm done apologizing for getting help. He didn't reply. Just turned on his heel and left the room, the door swinging shut behind him, harder than necessary. For a moment, no one moved. Patricia rose, smoothing her skirt. She walked past me as though I didn't exist, but just before the door, she paused and leaned close. You don't know what we've put in motion, she whispered, voice barely audible. This isn't just about the company anymore. Then she was gone. The only sound left was the quiet hum of the Zoom call still active and the wind brushing gently against the glass windows behind me. And for the first time, I realized I wasn't sitting at a table. I was sitting on a fault line. And the shaking hadn't even started. They called it a family dinner, but the moment I stepped into the house, I knew better. Patricia's home in Indian Hill had always been cold in its perfection, like a catalog spread with no fingerprints allowed. Tonight it was spotless to the point of tension. The dining room shimmered with silver candlesticks and white roses, the roast chicken untouched in the center of the table, as if it were staged for a magazine, not for eating. I scanned the room. My mother stood at the head of the table, wine glass, raised in greeting. Logan leaned casually against a leather chair, smiling like he was hosting a holiday, and seated at the far end, too far to be coincidence, was Mr. Gaines, a board member. He smiled with a tight politeness that didn't touch his eyes. Patricia's voice cut through the air, smooth as lacquer. Maddie, darling, so glad you made it. My heels clicked across the marble floor as I approached. I wasn't aware we had company. She gave a soft chuckle, one that didn't quite reach her eyes. It's just dinner. Informal, of course. Mr. Gaines was in the area. Mr. Gaines nodded, dabbing at his brow with a napkin. Yes, quite informal. Ethan had offered to come inside with me, but I told him to wait in the car. I needed to handle this alone. Still, I could feel his presence like an anchor just beyond the front door. I took my seat slowly. Brittany poured the wine, her movements precise, almost robotic. She didn't meet my eyes. Patricia raised her glass again. To family transitions. I didn't lift mine. Logan leaned forward, placing a cream-colored folder beside my plate. We thought this might ease the tension. It's a draft, nothing binding. Just a letter of voluntary resignation. Mental health sabbatical, of course. You'd still keep your shares. For now. I opened the folder. My name was at the top of the letter, the font unmistakably professional. My digital signature had already been appended at the bottom. You forged this, I said flatly, eyes not leaving the page. It's just a formality. Logan said, his tone breezy. You've been under pressure. Therapy time off. It's not a good look for the board. Patricia's smile remained plastered in place. It's best we make decisions before public perception does. I sat very still, counted 3 beats, then calmly I reached into my bag and pulled out a sealed envelope. Patricia's eyes flickered. I opened the envelope slowly, deliberately. Inside was a printed letter from my father dated nearly a year before his passing. I placed it on the table between the wine glasses and untouched dinnerware. This, I said, is Harold Carter's fraud protection protocol. Mr. Gaines leaned forward. I wasn't aware you wouldn't be, I cut in. It was only to be revealed if someone tried to falsify board decisions. It includes a requirement for voice print verification for all signature approvals, especially in the case of contested mental fitness. Patricia reached for her wine. Her fingers trembled slightly. I pulled out my phone and pressed play. My father's voice filled the dining room clear and steady. If you're hearing this, it means someone's attempting to rewrite my decisions. Maddie is to remain on the board unless legally incapacitated. Any action taken without her explicit verified consent is to be considered null. This is your contingency. The table went silent. Mr. Gaines shifted in his chair, clearing his throat. Well, that certainly complicates things. Patricia turned to him, still composed. Let's not overreact. I'm sure there's been a misunderstanding. Mistake or not, I said this ends tonight. Logan stood abruptly, hands gripping the back of his chair. You don't get to play the victim when you've always been the favorite. I tilted my head. That's interesting coming from someone with 3 failed ventures and a seat at a table he never earned. Patricia placed a hand on his arm, silencing him. Mr. Gaines rose. I believe I've overstayed my welcome. Indeed, I replied, but I appreciate the witness. He gathered his coat and left the room without another word. The door echoed behind him like a gavel. I stood pushing my chair back with a quiet scrape. The silverware barely rattled, but the moment felt seismic. Patricia stood too, stepping toward me. Her voice dropped to a whisper. You don't know what we've put in motion, Maddie. This isn't just about the company anymore. I held her gaze. Then I hope you're ready for what's coming next. As I turned to leave, I paused in the doorway. I hope you both enjoyed dinner. It's your last one with my silence. And with that, I walked out, passing the untouched chicken and polished glassware through a house that looked like home, but never truly was. Outside, Ethan stepped out of the car as I approached. He didn't ask what happened. He just opened the passenger door and waited. As we drove away, I didn't look back, but I knew whatever they had put in motion, I was already ahead of it. I used to sit quietly during storms, wait them out with a book and peppermint tea, telling myself that silence was strength. But this time, I didn't wait for the thunder to come to me. I walked into the storm, and I brought lightning with me. The Legal Mediation Center was tucked between a credit union and a yoga studio downtown. Sleek glass doors, beige carpet too clean to feel real and artificial citrus, wafting faintly from a hidden diffuser. The hearing room had floor-to-ceiling glass on one side, a mahogany table stretching across the center, and nameplates in front of each seat. My name was printed in bold. That part still startled me. Patricia was already seated when I walked in. Hands folded, mouth drawn tight in what could only be described as dignified disdain. Logan sat next to her legs, crossed fingers, casually tapping on his phone like he was bored. He didn't even glance up until Samantha Wells placed her briefcase on the table and nodded at me. Ethan wasn't allowed to speak in the hearing, but he was there just behind me, silent, steady. I didn't look back, but I knew he was watching. We'll begin with documentation, Samantha announced, calm and clear. Her voice always held a tone of quiet finality, like punctuation made human. She passed neatly stapled copies down the table. You'll find metadata verifying the unauthorized use of Ms. Carter's digital credentials used to file a resignation she never wrote. The mediator, a woman in her 60s with silver hair pulled into a braid, adjusted her glasses and began flipping through the packet. The 2 board representatives sat beside her, stony-faced, but one leaned slightly forward. That was all I needed. We also found access logs. Samantha continued detailing Patricia Carter's attempts to disable Harold Carter's clause protections 3 days after his passing. The override attempt came from a deactivated login. Still, Patricia didn't flinch, but Logan's leg twitched. He looked at the ceiling like it might rescue him. I'd like to call Ms. Madeline Carter, Samantha said. The walk to the witness chair wasn't long, but my heels echoed against the floor louder than expected. I sat spine straight, hands relaxed. I'd practiced this in my apartment, speaking into the mirror, recording myself until my voice didn't wobble. I wasn't invited to the meeting where my supposed resignation was discussed. I began. I learned about it from a legal email which included a digital signature I didn't authorize. My voice was even steady. I looked at the mediator first, then the board members. I searched my father's records after that. I found a sealed envelope, one he marked for me only. Inside was a memo handwritten affirming the clause that protected my shares. He wrote, "If they try to take this from you, they are breaking my will literally." A hush fell. The only sound was the water cooler burbling faintly from outside the glass. Samantha pulled up a file on the screen. "This is a time-stamped audio memo," she said. Harold Carter recorded 2 weeks before his passing. We listened. His voice, warm, worn, tired, filled the room. "If Maddie is ever removed from the board without her consent, it's not a family disagreement. It's fraud." When the audio ended, I could feel Patricia's eyes drilling into me, but I didn't look her way. Logan broke first. "She's not well," he said. "She's been in therapy for years. Our investors can't afford that kind of instability." The room didn't react, but I could almost hear the thought behind every raised eyebrow. There it was, the strategy. Use my mental health as a wedge. Twist vulnerability into a weapon. Samantha didn't even look at him. "Seeking mental health care is not a legal disqualifier," she said sharply. "In fact, I'd argue it shows responsibility. Ms. Carter has a spotless executive record, no missed quarterly targets, no investor complaints, no internal investigations. Her leadership kept Carter Logistics profitable through a supply chain collapse and 2 strikes. That's what stability looks like." The mediator turned to me. Her eyes were soft but unwavering. "Miss Carter, do you have any final remarks?" I stood, not because I was asked to, but because I needed to. I turned to Patricia. She stared at me as if I were some stranger who had wandered in. "You didn't just break the law," I said. "You broke a man's legacy so you could keep a fantasy of control. You used grief as leverage. You pretended this was about business, but it was always about erasing me. And my father knew it. That's why he left protections in place, not just for me, but for everything he built." For a moment, no one moved. Then the mediator spoke. "The clause stands. All actions to remove Ms. Carter are void. Effective immediately, Patricia and Logan Carter are suspended from board activities pending full review." The statement wasn't shouted. No gavel slammed. But it landed with more weight than anything I'd ever heard in that room. I gathered my folder slowly, fingers no longer trembling. The sound of my own breath filled the silence. Ethan opened the door, and for the first time in weeks, the air outside felt like mine again. But before I crossed the threshold, Logan followed. His voice came in low, slick, and practiced. "This isn't over," he said. "Blood always comes back around." I turned and looked him in the eye, not with fear, with clarity. "Then you'd better be ready for what comes back." And I walked out, not quietly, not waiting, and not alone. They lost the company, but I lost something too. And for the first time in my life, I didn't fight to get it back. I let it go. It was the Wednesday before Thanksgiving, and Hocking Hills had already tucked itself into winter's edge. Trees stood bare against the pale sky, their branches like old hands pressed against the cold. The air outside bit at my face as I stepped onto the gravel path leading up to my father's cabin, a quiet place tucked between oaks and memory. Inside the fire was already going thanks to Ethan. He knew how to arrive before me and still make it feel like I was the one welcoming him. He didn't say much, just nodded from the armchair where he sat flipping through a faded logistics journal from the early 2000s. The cabin smelled like lemon oil, cedarwood, and the faint trace of peppermint from the tea I'd just set on the mantel beside my father's old mug. That mug still had a chip on the rim, a flaw I used to think made it worthless. Now it felt like proof of use, of presence. Framed above the fireplace was the envelope labeled, "For Madeline Only." The handwriting was my father's, sure, slanted, and confident, even in the face of death. His last line echoed in my head like a bell. "If they try to take this from you, they are breaking my will, literally." I'd spent weeks honoring that line. Earlier that week, I finalized changes to the company's bylaws. No Carter, not me, not Logan, not anyone could ever hold a board seat again without a full third-party ethics review. Nepotism died quietly in legal language. It felt clean. My title now read, Madeline Carter, CEO, simple brass, no middle initial, no frills, just mine. Logan had sent a letter, certified. I recognized the handwriting before I even saw the name. It wasn't an apology. If I knew my brother, it was a negotiation in disguise. I held it for a while, feeling the familiar weight of his entitlement press against my fingers. Then I fed it to the fire. The flames danced like they understood. They took the envelope, folded it in on itself, and erased it without a sound. Thanksgiving came quietly. Ethan and I cooked a small dinner, just enough for us and 2 interns I'd been mentoring. Young, bright, and wide-eyed, they brought apple cider and questions about leadership and loyalty. I told them the truth. It's not about being liked. It's about being trusted when the room empties and the storm rolls in. We had dry turkey, lumpy mashed potatoes, and a cracked gravy boat someone found at Goodwill. It was perfect. No speeches, no formality, just presence. Later that night, Ethan and I sat on the porch with mugs of peppermint tea. The stars were out, poking through the quiet black sky. Somewhere inside the fireplace hissed as a log cracked. I keep thinking I should feel victorious, I said, my voice low. You are, Ethan replied without looking away from the stars. You just redefined what winning looks like. I nodded. He was right. I didn't reclaim the company to punish them. I did it to protect the parts of my father that mattered. And in the end, the most powerful thing I'd done wasn't testifying or filing legal motions or burning Logan's letter. It was saying no to revenge. Instead, I launched the Harold Carter Memorial Fund, $250,000 towards scholarships for logistics students who didn't come from legacy. Blue-collar kids who'd carried crates before they ever touched a spreadsheet. My father would have smiled at that. When I stood to go inside, Ethan followed. The cabin creaked beneath our steps, old wood remembering younger feet. I paused at the mantel and touched the frame. My father hadn't left me money. He'd left me something harder to carry and more important to protect a name. And as the fire flickered its last heat, I looked at my reflection in the glass. I hadn't just taken back what was mine. I'd rewritten the story. On my terms. In my voice. And this time, no one else would hold the pen. There's a quiet kind of strength in knowing when to stop fighting and start choosing. That Thanksgiving night beside the fire, I didn't feel victorious. I felt free. Sometimes the most lasting legacies aren't built through titles or courtrooms, but through the grace to walk away with your dignity intact. In families, love and control can look too similar until you've lived long enough to know the difference. If this story stirred something in you, I'd love to hear what you've kept and what you've let go. Leave a comment or just take a moment to reflect. Some stories stay with us, long after the last word. Where are you watching from today? I'd love to know what part of the world you're in and whether this story stirred something in you. Drop a comment below and share your thoughts. You never know who might need to read your words.